It is my pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to the 2024 version of L'chaim, A Taste of Jewish Music from Anywhere. This program got started back during the pandemic. It was a monthly program for quite a while where literally we did learn from various presenters, special places and special things or things that meant something special to these presenters. So now I'm going to say very quickly something about my wonderful friend and colleague, Elizabeth Betsy Schauer, who I had the pleasure of knowing back when she was still in this time zone, when she was working at Adams State in Alamosa, Colorado. Betsy has since moved on to doing many more wonderful things in Arizona, chief amongst them for this past academic year, working on the music of Salomone Rossi. Many of you know who Salomone Rossi is, but there are many of you who may not know much about this Italian Jewish maverick, really, composer who lived approximately from 1570 to 1630, from Mantua, a person who's was a prolific composer within various different disciplines, but for many of us in this room, most excited was the fact that with the blessing of his rabbi, he set that we know of 33 Hebrew choral works from from 3 to 8 voices, and they were published in October of 1622, which corresponds to our Jewish New Year of 5783. So you do the math. 400 years ago, and Betsy's going to speak about all of those things. So with that, I invite you to mute yourselves. Thank you. Most of you have done that. And take it away, Betsy.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an incredible honor and privilege. And Carol talks about our time together in Colorado, and I can remember learning from you at a Colorado ACDA session. And I have been so lucky to learn from so many conductors and scholars about an incredible body of music that is, Joshua Jacobson says we're not supposed to call it Jewish choral music, but then he proceeds to call it Jewish choral music. But that certainly wasn't part of my formal training. And so I'm really happy that it's beginning to find its way into training programs so that we can permanently change this. And studying Salomone Rossi was a special joy. I'm a big fan of music from the time that he composed. And then to discover things about him, to be able to share some that you know and some that some people know, and many things that people don't know. And their response is consistently, wow, this is amazing, wonderful music, and I'm so happy to know it now. So hopefully we can affect some large-scale change and that people will be more familiar. So the presentation that I created is a little bit academic, so I'll skip over some of the music-y stuff, but you can, if I have copied the right thing, I can put the presentation folder into the chat. So if you look like you're glazing over, I'll quit talking about harmonic language and we can just talk and listen to his music. Let me see if I did. The last thing I copied was the link to the folder. Oh, it was not. So if you can help me remember, I'll do that at the end. Okay. So, okay. So I'm very grateful to Carol because I had the wrong image up to start with, and she says we have learned from Joshua Jacobson, the preeminent Jewish choral music scholar in the United States, that wasn't his image. Maybe this one was, but certainly the other one wasn't. So you see his name spelled many different ways. Salomone, these multiple different ways. And choose one. So what do we know about him? Well, what do we know about Jewish music in the Renaissance? So from the end of the 15th century through 1630, which is the active time of Rossi, the court of Mantua was a superb cultural center featuring a permanent professional musical ensemble and attracting many famous composers, among them Monteverdi, Gastoldi, Rossi, and Viadano. So these are all names that are still familiar today. Rossi less. To provide music for all kinds of celebrations, secular, for chapel services, and for theatrical productions. So at this time in Mantua, Jewish people were allowed to freely intermingle with non-Jews, and so were exposed to a lot of artistic and literary influences that came from outside of the Jewish population. Jewish artists of the court were exceptional vocalists, instrumentalists, composers, dancers, choreographers, and there was a very famous Jewish theatrical troupe that was popular with Jewish and Christian audiences. In the Jewish ghetto, it was popular, but also in court and in neighboring principalities. Rossi was also the composer for that troupe. So what happens, right, is he has this incredible commodity, artistic commodity, that is wonderful, and people want it, right? People are greedy for that. And so because of that, and also because the Duke wasn't as problematic as some leaders, then there begins to be this intermingling that there was not in a lot of other places at this time. So he has some entree that other people didn't. Oh, my little savvy is a little wacky. So we're not sure exactly when he was born, and we're not sure exactly when he died. Very little is known about the details of his life. Because he had music published and reprinted and reprinted and reprinted because he was very popular, we know some things about him, and that's where the information comes from. So he probably was born in Mantua, since he spent his entire professional career there. He would have lived in the Jewish ghetto there, but come to court during the day. As a young man, he made his reputation as a violinist rather than a composer. By 1587, he was hired by Duke Vincenzo as a resident musician at the court of Mantua. But in addition to his performing, he also was composing music for instruments and for voices. His principal professional connections were with one of the Jewish theatrical troupes that I mentioned that played a significant role in Mantuan theatrical life, in the Christian community and at court. In addition to in the Jewish ghetto where Jews were confined to live. The ghetto had been established by the same Duke in 1612. So later we're going to think, oh, maybe he was a good guy, but he wasn't that good of a guy. Rossi was evidently well regarded by Vincenzo Gonzaga, Duke of Mantua from 1562 to 1612. And how we know this is because Jews at that time had to wear a yellow badge, but sometimes, as Joshua Jacobson reminds me, not all the time, sometimes this was relaxed for Rossi, in his case by a ducal decree in 1606. But we remember that the Duke was the one who put it there, so we're not too grateful to him for relaxing the edict. And as I mentioned before, there were other famous composers of the Renaissance and late Renaissance. Initially, when I was learning about Rossi, in his collection, his name is listed as Salomone Rossi the Jew. And what I first learned was that he was forced to put that and forced to be identified by that. And then what I later learned was no, he proudly appended that to his title. So I was delighted to learn that, which is a much better situation. The dedication of his last published work is 1628. And that's why we think that maybe he wasn't around too much longer after that. In 1630, the Austrian troops invaded Mantua and destroyed the Jewish ghetto. Its inhabitants fled, but there also was the plague. So he probably died in 1630. That's what's believed. And then he was all but forgotten until 200 years later, when his music was found and then given to Naumburg, cantor of the Great Synagogue of Paris. And in 1876, the modern edition of his music was published. And thanks to that, we have his music now. But it's quite a remarkable story because the music that he composed, especially, not the madrigals specifically, but the Hebrew motets, there was nothing like that before him. he was a total innovator in creating, it's believed that there was nothing like that before him. And then he didn't have students. There wasn't a school he was part of, so nothing like that followed. So he is this really exceptional and unique composer and presence, and his music is astonishingly good. He set the bar in a couple of other ways too. The works that he composed were almost all printed during his lifetime, and some of them multiple times. So that's how we know that they were popular, because they had multiple printings. He had books of madrigals, duets, canzonets, which are smaller madrigal-like works, instrumental works, including sonatas, sinfonias, and dance pieces. And he had the first published trio sonatas in the literature, if that's meaningful to you, one balletto, and then astonishingly, the collection of Hebrew motets for the synagogue, for which we are celebrating the 400th anniversary, either in 2022 or 2023, depending on how you're counting. So let's jump down to the madrigals. So he had numerous books of madrigals. Most of them were for 5 voices, so we might think of SSATB or SATTB, and also one book for 4 voices. And this book for 4 voices became very interesting to me, because none of the works are published yet, either on something like CPDL or for sale anywhere. So as a project here with my students, we each chose one of these madrigals and created a scholarly free edition of them that you can find in Choral Public Domain Library. We didn't finish all of them, but 8 of them are in there. So now they're available to people and we love them. So what's interesting about, well, let me skip down a little bit. So then the texts for these madrigals were famous Italian poets of the day. And Rossi was a trend leader in many ways. So he was the only one to have set 30 of these poetic texts, but also he was the first one to set 41 of these texts. So then many of these other composers, Italian composers, then after he had set them, they also set them. So I found that to be very interesting. So they're shorter works, 7 to 13 lines with a particular poetic form. And also interesting, most of them are he speakers. They're usually about love. Most of them are he speakers, but also 2 of them have she speakers, and also many have indeterminate speakers. So I think that's a lovely and innovative and progressive thing. Some of them are dialogues. Most of them are about love, both the pain and the delight, as is common for Italian madrigals. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff. I can't see your faces to know if you're glazing over. Maybe you're drinking a little more right now. Most of them are in duple meter. They have the same kind of harmonic language as the other composers of this time. They're in a style where the words are important. So if there is an interesting word like love, maybe it has a little ornament on it. Or if there's a word like pain, maybe it has a really crunchy, dissonant harmony. So those are some of the exciting things about it. So I talk here about what editions there are of these works. Most of them are not published where you can go to a publisher and buy them, but many of them are available for free in the Choral Public Domain Library. So now let's listen to one. On this screen, if you can see it, I hope you can see it. It has the translation. It says, a lovesick, meaning lovesick person, once bewailed his grief to the stars under the nightly sky, and looking up to them said, oh, beautiful images of the one I adore, just as you show me with your gleaming, her unique beauty, show her as well, how I burn for her, and make her with your golden radiance as merciful to me as you have enchanted me for her. Oh, those Italians. And you know, if you imagine yourself to be a composer, you read this poetry, right? And it has all kinds of images that you can bring out in the music. So I'm going to try to leave that translation up and we'll listen to this now. And I hope you'll be able to hear it well. You never know on Zoom.
Spoga, spoga.
I just think that's astonishingly beautiful music, and accessible for, accessible for any group that would be performing Italian madrigals. I think there's a high level of independence in this kind of music, and you can hear they're using maybe one on a part and then a little chordal instrument to go along with it, but it's just so rich and so beautiful. Do you have any questions about the madrigals? And I'll try to pull up the performing group at the end. I should put that in my presentation. Any questions? Keep on?
I think so far so good. Keep going.
Okay. So then next are the Hebrew motets, which is, I guess, a name for them, right? A motet is kind of a generic word that means a sacred piece. So a lot of people refer to them as Hebrew motets. And here is the cover of the collection that they are in, which I think is beautiful. That was a thing, right? They want to have beautiful prints and so many beautiful things, but beautiful things for the cover of the publication. And so the name of the publication is The Songs of Solomon, but it doesn't relate to the book, the religious text, the Songs of Solomon. They are the songs of Salomone Rossi. They are the music that he has composed. So that's kind of a clever title that he has used for that. And this is the 1622, that is what the 1622 publication looks like. So that's very beautiful. I just told you that, okay. So this is the only existing collection of polyphonic music for the synagogue to appear in print before the 19th century. And as Carol said, including 33 polyphonic or multi-part settings of Hebrew psalms, hymns, and synagogal songs. And the thing that's unusual about, he is the first Jew to compose, perform, and publish polyphonic settings of the synagogue liturgy for mixed choir. Before that, chant. Before that, hundreds of years of tradition. So, you might listen to this music and go, oh gosh, this is great. How wonderful it would be to go worship and hear this. Everybody did not say, oh gosh, this music is great at first. Some people said, why are you using Christian music for Jewish worship? Why are you taking that from that other tradition for Jewish worship? So, and some people, it's the same. I don't know about for you, but I've been in church music a really long time, and people think it's always a new thing. In the 70s, we had what was called hum and strum, right? Folk music, and people are like, you can't have that in the church. We need the old stuff. And then, later you have whatever contemporary Christian music, and you're like, no, that is not church music. Well, in the Baroque, oh no, you can't have theater music. Oh, you can't have, so that is age old. Anyway, so the other thing, as you might imagine, that would be interesting is he was the first person to attempt to print music with Hebrew texts. Now think about that for a minute. You have, if I'm showing you from your perspective, you have music that goes this way, and you have Hebrew texts that go this way. So try to imagine being the publisher, figuring out how are we going to do that. And so rather than doing everything all the way backwards, to go with the music, each syllable went backwards to go with the particular note of music that it went with it. And you just think there were such incredible odds that he had to overcome to succeed in the environment that he did and to publish music. So this is why this is such an exceptional collection in so many different ways. So before this time, art music, if you think about it as polyphonic music, art music was not part of the Jewish tradition. So this was very new with no known precedent. Some people argue that it was happening at other places in Europe, but there certainly are no printed collections. So there's no evidence today. And then, as I mentioned, no tradition that followed. So really rare and exceptional music. So here you can see the volume is organized by the number of voices. So the 3-voice works first, 4-voice, 5-voice, and then 6-voice works. And so maybe you recognize some of these texts if you're used to any portion of your worship in Hebrew, but like the full Kaddish, and then Psalm 150, different Psalms, and then the blessing Baruch and I have trouble saying this, Odecha, which we will listen to. So beautiful Psalm texts and a variety of difficulty levels, right? Because he wants them to get performed and performed well. So some are very accessible. This Barahu, very accessible 3-part. He doesn't include in these multi-part settings the part that the congregation would respond. So if they're used in worship, that needs to be provided, right, by chant or whatever is appropriate in that particular worship. If they're done for concert performance, that doesn't have to be part of the music. You don't have to come up with that. You can just sing the music that he provided. But you can see there 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 voices. So pretty complicated. So the text includes Psalms, other portions of the Hebrew Bible, prayers, hymns, and a wedding ode. The biggest one, I think, is a wedding ode, but mostly Psalms, as we saw that. So this is also a very different and complicated process. If you think about setting, yes, I agree, Richard, that was a beautiful performance. If you think about setting Psalm texts, they do have obviously Hebrew poetic structure, and but it's very different from doing sort of rhymed metrical madrigal texts. So he's also creating a new style of music to go with these beautiful texts and their own textual characteristics. So mostly they are 3 to 8 voices and mostly unaccompanied. So yes, that would have been appropriate for worship, unaccompanied. So in the collection, I mentioned that. And again, here's a whole bunch of music stuff. The one thing that was important is for somebody who is setting music with assigned rhythms, he also had to figure out the appropriate way to make the Hebrew text sound appropriately set with the correct accents and the correct treatment of the syllables. So that's another thing that he's dealing with for the first time, assigning particular rhythms to the way the text will be delivered. He still has what we call text painting. Biblical texts have lots of beautiful imagery that you can create musical pictures of. So he's stealing a little bit from that secular tradition to put that beauty of the setting into his music. You also have echoes, like with the big voice works, you might have a back and forth, 4 voices sing as a choir and the other 4 voices answer. You might have a picture of if something's going up, that you have the music goes up in steps and things like that. So he intended them for liturgical use. They may have been performed in the synagogue or in a study hall or in the house of the bride and groom or in private homes, but also it's possible that they may never have been performed in the synagogue. So they were used for holidays, feast days, festivals, the Sabbath, special Sabbaths, weddings, circumcisions, and times of rejoicing, at private celebrations to express joy and praise. And Joshua Jacobson in particular argues that they all should be sung joyfully. And anytime he hears the Kaddish one sung slowly, he's like, no, 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 no. And I mentioned before, portions of the text that would be sung by the congregation are not in the collection. So I mentioned to you, the Jewish music tradition was ancient, and prayer tunes were in their original form and monophonic 1 part with no harmonization allowed.
This is when I'm going to jump in and say, prior to Rossi's time, there had been the tradition of called the Mishorarim, who were like, we'll call them the backup singers, like
yes.
Yes. 30 feet from fame, I think is the name of Darlene Love's book, something like that, before she herself emerged as at the front of the microphone. So people would, in fact, harmonize, and often the cantor would have young children basically standing there, so they would have the pitch and everybody would go hum, whatever it was. And to this day, there are certain congregations throughout the world, both in the Ashkenazi or the Western European style, as well as in the Sephardi Mediterranean style, and in the Yemenite community, where you hear lots of humming that goes along. And now back to you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, when you say there was no choral, we don't say there was no choral tradition before. It kind of depends on what you define choral as, right? Is it group singing, or is it four-part singing? Is it one on a part? Does it have to be more than 20? So we don't say there was no multi-part music. We don't say there was no choral music. We just say there wasn't this yet. And somebody was asking, what did the scores look like? And the answer was given. They are in what's called part book format. So if you're not familiar with that, and in fact, I got to see them on microfilm, and I had to show the librarians how microfilm worked because they were familiar with it. But Joshua Jacobson provided me with some of that. So what that means is the soprano part, all in its particular notation, all in one. On another page, the alto part on another page. So that's part book format, rather than score like the way we see choral music today, where we're so lucky we get to see what everybody has, so we know how our parts fit together. So the conservatives, there was a general sort of animosity toward innovation in liturgy, and art music was not considered to be part of the tradition and seemed to some to be profane and heretical, especially since it was identified with the secular and sacred music of the Gentiles. But then, just like throughout any time in history, there also were progressives. So you have Italian Jews who liked the new Renaissance music. They're in this culture where people are sharing and hearing and experiencing, and they wanted it in their synagogues. In Padua and Ferrara, there already were synagogue choirs at the end of the 16th century, and Modena, an organ, and in Venice, a complete orchestra. So we know that this was happening. And a number of enlightened rabbis defended the new musical practice. Enlightened feels like kind of a judgment word, but it was the age of enlightenment, so I'll use it. Okay, so the first one of these that I want to share with you, Odecha, however you would like to spell it. I love this, and my choir has sung this, and we will sing it again as our opening piece for the Western ACDA conference this year in Pasadena, California. And I'm delighted to share it because they call the category, as Carol well knows, there's a category of repertoire and resources that's called worship and music, but it's really Christian worship and music. And so I think ACDA would like to, American Choral Directors Association would like to do a better job, but they need to do a better job. So we're happy to share this beautiful music, and we hope everyone will copy us and sing it. So this is a performance by the University of Houston choir under the direction of Betsy Cook Weber. And here's the text, 3 verses from Psalm 118. think that that is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. I could hear that a lot. Let me turn that off before some ad comes on.
And just as a fun fact, otherwise, the eldest of our our elder daughter and our elder son, uh, their Hebrew names translate as joy and happiness, and they are included in the psalm text. So you hear Nagila, so that's our daughter Gila, and it's V'nismecha or Simcha, happiness, and that's our son. We didn't plan it that way, but it worked out pretty nicely.
Well, that is beautiful. So then the other one that we are going to listen to, and this presentation is probably prepared for people who know less about Kaddish than you all do, but a prayer in Aramaic recited following the death of a loved one, including at various times after the passing and also in anniversaries of the passing. It is a prayer of praise, even though it's in minor, set in minor. It is for the living and states that there will be a time when all illness and suffering will cease, and asks that this time come during our lifetime. And I'll come back. And the Kaddish is fancy. Yes. Yes. Well, on the Kaddish, it doesn't, at this time in music history, composers didn't put a tempo marking on. The metronome had not been invented yet. And people were just starting to put things like soft, loud. So we didn't have any kind of indication written above that says joyous or allegro or pretty fast or something like that. So you look at the best evidence that you can, and then you make the best decisions that you can, and then you listen to other people and maybe you change your mind. Here is the full text. If you can look at that. Probably you're familiar with it, but maybe you can look at that as we do it. So in this setting of it, you'll hear music that's repeated, that comes back, and you'll hear also contrasting. I'm trying to remember in this performance, you might hear a smaller group and then a bigger group, so that you can have more contrast, because it is kind of a long piece and a longer text. So that gives some variety, and I'm having trouble remembering some of that now, but maybe I can talk about a little bit after it's over too. So here you go. I should say one other thing. So this Baroque practice that we call sometimes basso continuo, you can hear that there is an instrument that will play the bass line, and then there's an instrument that will play chords to fill in the texture. And so, throughout the history of worship in a variety of traditions, there's debate about whether there should be instruments or whether there shouldn't be instruments. And I don't know, but I think Miriam had a tambourine. So anyway, you'll hear the sacred text accompanied with instruments, right? so good, right? And it's performed in many ways in the style of secular music of that time. So somebody was asking, is it a particular dance? Um, Multi-part music in the Renaissance grew out of dance traditions, and some of it did, right? And actually, the other thing about it is the instruments you hear playing some of the vocal parts. That's how instrumental music started too. That the instrument families were the same as the voice families, SATB, so they could read the vocal music, and then they started having their own music that was kind of based on those models. But generally, triple meter in the Renaissance, it comes out of dance feel. In Christian sacred music, initially triple music was the sign of perfection related to the Trinity, and duple music wasn't allowed. I don't know, all these things, and particular intervals were the interval of Satan and stuff like that too in music. So let's see, we have some more questions. Especially dyslexics. Yeah, for sure. Yes, there are some alternating feel of three. Yeah, there's some hemiola. So da, 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 dun, dun, dun. Yeah, for sure. Right out of secular music that was in the madrigals, you could have going along a duple, ya, da, 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 da. So a different expression of that too against three hemiola. Rossi's publisher put the word on the final notes for the singing of that word, so the accent of the word would be obvious. Yeah, that makes sense. And Phyllis, my guess is that if you sang that with Joshua Jacobson, you sang it faster than that, because I think that he would see this as a little bit too, I want to say maudlin, that's related to Mary Magdalene, as a little too, yeah, not joyful enough, because it's a joyful text. And so probably that was our sonic model. So our performance of it when we did it was probably like that. We were very fortunate to have outstanding improvisatory instrumental players, including a recorder player, Baroque guitar player, and a cellist to do it when we did it too, and that's lovely. I see there's another thing in the chat. I'll just share this. I don't know if this is meaningful or important to you, but whoever was asking about the scores, if you go to this website called IMSLP, which is International Music Score Library Project, imslp.org, I think, you can literally see the part books. So they're there that you can look at. Other incredible sources that some of which you might not need, but some of which you might enjoy. There's a wonderful book, Translations and Annotations of Choral Repertoire, Volume 4 is Hebrew texts. And I think I have all the ones, the Latin, all the ones that are available so far, French, German, Italian, and then the Hebrew. So it has some of the background stories. And maybe you're very well versed on the background stories, but a lot of people don't necessarily know the background of the sacred texts, where they came from. So Donald Haran did do an edition of Rossi's complete works that was started in 1993. And if you want, you can actually buy those. Now, usually university libraries buy these, and our library has some of them because I requested them. They didn't have them otherwise. But otherwise, I'm not sure if you want to shell out $600 or $700 to get all of them, but you can get those, and that has all of his works that are in print. If some of you probably sang with the Zamir Chorale, but these are wonderful resources about Rossi here. And then also this is, if you haven't listened to Joshua Jacobson's podcasts yet, I highly recommend. They're enjoyable to listen to and educational, and some of it you might already know, but goes from ancient practice to contemporary composers. Okay, so yes, Josh has it right. Yes, of course he does. He's also an incredibly generous and kind person and scholar, and he oversaw some of the editorial practice of what we called our Rossi project with those 4-part madrigals. And anytime I have any question to try to be well educated or to be authentic, or should this be a natural or a sharp, he is so kind to respond and to help. So I've been super grateful for him throughout my career. I remember going to a wonderful presentation of his, and he just had another Choral Journal article published. He retired, so he should be not doing stuff, but he's doing more stuff to help everyone. But he did, yes. And he did a presentation called Sacred Bridges. So, for example, it would have show a portion of Gregorian chant in Latin that was on a particular textual idea, and then the Hebrew chant that has, that obviously the Gregorian chant came from. Sorry, Pope Gregory, you're in trouble, we know. But that had the same formula and shape, and things like that he shared with us. And so we also this last year performed his publication that had those two, and the sopranos and altos went down. One of them had a shofar. I said, I really wish we could start this concert with the shofar. And one of them says, I have one. So the sopranos and altos walked in on this side, singing the Hebrew chant, and then they would alternate with the tenors and basses on this side, singing the Gregorian chant. And it to me was just so powerful, because not only is it important that we understand origins and roots, but also commonalities. My colleague says, in our music, it's important for us to have mirrors and also windows. So anyway, 1-800-JOSH. So that's all I have to share with you today. And I'm happy, thank you again for inviting me. And I'm happy to answer questions or have you share things that you would like to share.
Friends, at this point, I'll do the quick commercial, and then that'll give you a chance to unmute yourselves, but not all jump in at once with your questions. This gives Betsy a chance to do her own l'chaim. Thank you. All of you are well aware that when it comes to doing programs like this, nothing happens without your support. Thank you to people who stepped in even today to make sure that this happened. The Colorado Hebrew Chorale is grateful for the support from we'll start with the government ones. Why not? Why not? The Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, known as SCFD, and you can find out more about them at the letters S like Sam, C like Charlie, F like Frank, D like David, .org. The Colorado Hebrew Chorale also receives funding from Colorado Creative Industries. We receive fundings of all amounts from family and other foundations, but we can't do any of this without you. So Seth, I think, is pulling up the website, and you can find donate and do all of that. The other commercials are very quick because of, in the interest of time, we are having the resumption of our annual sight singing romp, which went up until 2019, and we all know what happened after that. We are focusing on Rossi, some of his influences and influencers. So if you can already imagine that Rossi helped pave a path for Jewish choral music and liturgical music in the synagogue back in the 17th century. We will also include a few people from the 20th, the 19th, 20th, and perhaps 21st centuries also. We have a number of local choral directors joining us. This event is a week from this evening. It is live and in person. Sorry, Zoomers, you have to buy a plane ticket if you want to get there and you don't live in Greater Denver, but it will be taking place on Thursday, August the 17th at 7 p.m. at the Hebrew Educational Alliance in Southeast Denver, 3600 South Ivanhoe. Visit the website, coloradohebrewchorale.org, for more information. The Colorado Hebrew Chorale's two choirs resume the next week with the Colorado Hebrew Chorale, our soprano, alto, tenor, bass choir on Monday evenings beginning on the 21st of August, and our Kol Nashim, our treble voice choir for soprano, soprano, alto voices, beginning on Thursday night, the 24th. People have asked, and we expect to have the recording of this session on our website in give us a week or two to make sure it all works out. Okay, and thank you. Yes, of course, the music of Corinne Duffy, uh, uh, wonderful and contemporary choral music, and all the people who are putting this in. Pingy, thank you, who is a colleague of Dr. Schauer's, and Pingy joining us from South Carolina. Forgive me if I get this wrong. I think it's Coker University in South Carolina, which I did not know about before tonight. Okay, you guys, questions? Wait.
One other little thing I want to mention, I just am remembering, on our website for the university, we have a free online distinguished speakers series that includes a lot of repertoire by historically excluded composers. And I just am remembering this because Corinne Duffy has a lecture there, but there is the site for that. But you're welcome to listen to any of them. It's anyway,
Great.
that's all. Go ahead. Questions? Or
No, we're good. I think there are people who may be ready to speak, so I am going to mute myself. And we've got maybe 5 minutes or so. And
oops, you just did mute yourself.
okay, now I am muting myself. Folks, if you got a question, unmute yourself and speak.
Or jokes. Anyone good jokes? Not dirty.
Okay,
I'm going
as I
to,
say, going once, going twice.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to thank Dr. Schauer. Absolutely enlightening,
My
um,
pleasure.
delightful.
Thank you for having me.
and I'm going to quote what we say to each other in the world of the educator group called Cage and now New Cage, which is thank you for being our teacher.
Well, thank you, Carol, for being an early teacher of mine as well. So full circle, right? My pleasure. It's my pleasure and honor.
Okay, friends, with that said, raise your glass. Mine's empty, but I'll fill it up again later, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, all of you, for being here and taking part in this great program. And Betsy, thank you again.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.